Hello everyone, this is Mathfinder, the home for every math nerd's Pathfinder organization needs. If you're new here, welcome, and we're so glad to have you. If you've been here before, welcome back, and thank you so much for continued support. Before we get into today's video, I wanted to talk a little bit about this channel. This channel has been growing very well, and recently it had a huge spurt in growth through the Impossible Magic preview series. For all the newcomers, welcome to the channel, and let me know in the comments what I can do to keep you around, what kind of content you'd like to see, which of my existing content catalog is your favorite. And to those that have been around since the start, thank you, and I hope I continue to make content that you enjoy. In September of this year, for around 20 or so days, I expect to be away on vacation, and I will try and pre-record as many videos as possible for that gap to make sure that something interesting is coming out of this channel. But if I don't manage to get around to it, I do apologize in advance. It's been a very busy time of the year for me. That being said, I am really hoping to hit the ground running when I return at the end of September / beginning of October. All that being said, let's get into today's video. Saving throw optimization in Pathfinder is a heavily discussed topic. Most optimizers will agree on the most fundamental part of this. Saving throws are important. Every time you build a character, saving throws have to be part of the conversation. If someone says saving throws can just be dismissed, that I just dump all my stats and don't even think about it, they have probably not played very much Pathfinder 2nd Edition, definitely not in the mid-high level range, because saving throws just have to be part of your conversation as you grow your character. But how important are these saving throws? And that is where you'll find a lot of people have vastly differing opinions on how much you need to invest or not invest in saving throws. There is a small faction, though not a tiny faction, like I would say it's a meaningful minority of players who treat saving throws as being mandatory. Every possible attribute point you can spare must be invested into saving throws. These are the players who, when they build a sorcerer who uses charisma as their key attribute, will then have dexterity, constitution, and wisdom as their remaining 3 investments at every level possible. The only time at which they will even consider investing in intelligence or strength is when they're confident that the progression they're on will result in a half boost at level 20. And since half boosts at level 20 are irrelevant, they just go nowhere, you might as well put that +1 into intelligence or strength. That is the extreme risk aversion faction. This faction obviously has a huge crossover with the folks who optimize their characters in a risk-averse way, which I talked about in my previous video linked above. But again, they're not necessarily wrong. Saving throws are so important, you might as well think about investing in your saves in this manner. Then there is what I believe is the majority opinion among optimizers. They treat saving throws almost as a floor. You certainly need to think about investing enough into saves that you're not falling behind. Beyond that point, you should diversify, and they are the sorts of people who will not invest all the way up to +4 or +5 in dexterity, constitution, and wisdom, but will still invest meaningfully heavily. And to set the biases aside, this is the group that I have always been part of. I do treat saving throws as something you need to invest in to make sure you're not falling behind, but they're not mandatory. I will get charisma on my wizard, and I will get intelligence on my sorcerer if it makes sense for the things I want to do. And finally, there is another minority faction that treats saving throw investment as pure upside. They believe that investing nothing is still going to grant you basic scaling that just lasts through the game, and thus any investment is sort of meant to get you ahead of the curve. And full disclosure, I do think this faction is the most wrong of the 3. I think the game expects you to invest a little bit in your saving throws, and I hope that by the end of this video, I have convinced everyone that that is the case. Arguments can be made for either of the other 2 factions, and again, I lean towards the one that's in the middle. I'll also add that while treating saving throws as a floor might be a majority opinion among optimizers, where that floor sits still has a lot of ranges and disagreement. Some folks will say you only need 1 or 2 points for it to count as your floor. Some will say you need 3 or 4 points for it to be at your floor. So today we are going to be asking a lot of different questions and hopefully answering most of them. To what extent does the natural scaling protect us from the game's own math. Good math needs to be able to protect players who have not investigated it deeply from its own consequences. Does the saving throw scaling in this game do that? The next question would be, does the variation of high and extreme DCs in high level play and all of the run-on effects of that, like say evasion-like abilities, do all of these alter the conversation in any meaningful way? Then the next and most important question is, how much do you need to invest in attributes pertaining to saving throws? Then, how much do you want to invest in attributes pertaining to saving throws? Is there a point where you hit diminishing returns where you're like, even if I wanted to invest more in, say, wisdom, I wouldn't? And finally, is there a recipe for saving throw optimization that you can quickly reference when you're building your own characters? Let's try and answer all of these questions. To get started, let's do some math setup. First, we will be looking at two sets of DCs, standard DCs and boss DCs. Standard DCs will come from an on-level foe for all of levels 1 up till 20. Pretty simple. This is sort of the metric of what you expect an enemy who is good at their job to be feeling like when you're making a saving throw against them. And this is just an enemy on the same level as you. The expectation would be that a middle-of-the-road saving throw from a player should feel like a 50-50 shot of succeeding or failing against the monster, because that's also how monster math work against player saves for the most part, with a slight variation. Then there's the boss DC. For levels 1 to 4, I am considering a level +2 boss, and then for levels 5 to 20, I'm considering a level +4 boss. This is an intentional jump I made because Pathfinder is now a 7-year-old game. Community guidance on encounter guidelines has evolved over time. Our understanding, and even adventure writers' understanding, has evolved over time. And most notably, in War of Immortals, Paizo did publish updated encounter guidelines suggesting that you should not use bosses that are 3 or more levels above the party in that low level range. For all these reasons, I think it's fair to stick to level +2 for levels 1 to 4, but then I am using a level +4 boss after, because in my opinion, this tests the most extreme thing your saving throw can go up against. And I know some would argue that that's not fair, that that's an outlier that you should not be optimizing for. But I would argue back that that outlier, even if it shows up only once in a campaign, is probably the outlier that's gonna kill you. So you should at least be reasonable against it. I'm not saying give up on everything else, become bad in every other encounter, investing in your saving throws to account for this level +4 boss. But we need to at least make sure we're not utter garbage against this boss. Otherwise, we may have underinvested in our saving throws. And for all of these DCs, I am simply picking up the high DC from the spellcasting table. High DC is generally indicative of something that is a core competence of the character in question. DCs for something passive like auras typically tend to be lower, and likewise DCs for things that are just options tend to be lower. High DCs are typically what a spellcaster's 2-action spell will use, or a dragon's breath weapon will use, etc., and thus it makes a good benchmark for what you're evaluating. I will note here that I am aware of the building creatures guidelines that talk about how extreme DCs need to become more common at levels 15+. We are ignoring that for now. We will bring it back in for analysis later on. Now let's talk about the various proficiency tracks we're going to use. And here I had to simplify because there are dozens of proficiency tracks in the game with very slight variations. First up, there is the bad track. And as far as I can tell, this is the worst saving throw proficiency gets in this game. It is akin to a wizard's Fortitude. At level 1, you're trained. At level 9, you're expert. If there is a worse track than this, please let me know. But again, it wouldn't change the analysis too much because all it's really going to do is change where you get expert. Maybe there's something that gets expert at level 11 in whatever save we're talking about. Then there's the decent track. This is like a fighter's will saving throw. Trained at level 1, expert at level 3, but doesn't get any better than that after that point. Then there's the good proficiency track. Expert at level 1 and master at level 17. This is akin to a wizard's will saving throw. Then there is the great proficiency track. This is like a fighter's fortitude. Expert at level 1, master halfway through the game at level 9. And finally, there is the legendary proficiency track, which again, I believe is as good as it gets, but let me know if there's something that's slightly faster that I forgot about. This is akin to a ranger's reflex. Expert at level 1, master at level 7, legendary at level 15. And a really important note here, again, there's not 5 tracks in the game, there are dozens of them. There are things that get trained at level 1 and expert at level 5, or expert at level 7, which are a little better than bad, but not quite as good as decent. There are some that go all the way to legendary, but do so 2 levels later, like say a bard's will saving throw. There is a whole spectrum of these tracks, and honestly I think there's too many of them, but that's a separate point. Just know that as long as I'm correct about where as bad as it gets, as good as it gets, and like a range of 3 in between exists, you're going to get all of the tracks sandwiched between the outcomes that you see here, so it will make sense. And note here that I'm assuming you pick up resilient runes plus 1, 2, 3 at the same rate as automatic bonus progression. So as far as I'm concerned, no choice applies there, it just happens. It is just a passive boost you get into. For the first mathematical analysis, I will be assuming no attribute investment whatsoever. No wisdom, con, dexterity, whatever we're talking about. This is to help us answer the very first question I asked. What is the baseline for what the game has in store for us? What happens if you just don't invest in your saves? Does the game protect you against its own math? So this is what that math ends up looking like. This is what it will look like for the standard DC's case. The way to read this chart is as follows. The x-axis is level 1 up till 20. The y-axis represents the natural number needed on the d20 to succeed on that save. So for example, if you look at the purple line at level 2, it's saying I need a natural 12 to succeed. From there, you can also infer that a critical success requires a natural 20, and you can also infer that a critical failure requires a natural 1 or 2. And that's how you read every single point on this graph. The 5 different lines are the ones I described earlier. Red is the bad save progression. Yellow is the decent save progression. Green is the good save progression. Blue is the great save progression. And purple is the legendary save progression. And you can see that most of them hold still throughout the level range. They're pretty horizontal overall, with deflections +1 or -1, but deflections are expected because Pathfinder is a tabletop role-playing game, not a computer video game, which means you can't have 0.5 in a number. So some levels you're going to be a little behind, some levels are going to be a little bit ahead. But overall, the trend is horizontal, which is good. You want automatic progression to have a horizontal trend. Otherwise, it is falling off secretly as you level up, which is a bad thing. You will also notice that towards the later level range, the lines sort of clamp together. Yellow and red merge into being equally bad, blue and green merge into being equally middling, and purple is the only one that stands out. This is also expected because we only have 4 tiers of proficiency and you just hit them at different level ranges, right? So there are just some cases where a bad line is only bad up to a certain level and then the decent line collapses into it, and so on. None of that is out of the ordinary. But do take a note here of what the numbers for the saves look like. The red line is hovering between needing a natural 14 up to the natural 16 on these standard DCs. The purple line is mostly centered around needing a natural 12 and only drops to needing a natural 11? By the time you're level 15 and have legendary in your proficiency. And when we get to our deeper analysis later, you'll see why I'm slightly scoffing at this. But on a surface level, it does look like the horizontal trend holds, right? Next, let us look at the boss cases. Again, read the graph the same as before. Each dot is at that level what number you would need to roll to get a success. And do note here, over here, some of the outcomes are actually exceeding 20. So for example, at level 5, the red line is at 21. And this is also true at level 17 for the yellow line and the red line. That is an extreme case because that means you would roll a natural 20 still fail based on the number comparison and then have that upgraded to a regular success. You are incapable of critically succeeding on this saving throw. Now, do note here that levels 1 to 4 look like they're not part of a horizontal pattern, that it looks like there's a climb, but that's to be expected because I changed the metric for what the DCs look like starting at level 5. If you look level 5 onwards, it is a pretty horizontal trend. It's a horizontal trend around some really high numbers though. The legendary save line, which is in the 15 to 16 range at levels 1 to 4, which is reasonable, goes all the way up to like 19 in some of the worst cases against the extreme boss. And the red line looks abysmal. There are just so many points for the red and yellow line where you're barely able to succeed, if at all, against the boss. So with those numbers in mind, let us move into a deeper analysis. Now, the immediate conclusion that I come to is that your natural save progression without attributes is low. It is really not that good. In the standard DC's case, your target number was 11 or 12 for legendary and 14 to 16 for bad. Is really bad. That's really weird, right? Because the expectation would be that a middling saving throw growth would succeed close to 50% of the time. But we are finding that as good as it gets, the track that goes all the way up to legendary is unable to succeed more than 50% of the time without attribute investment. And likewise, for boss DCs, your target number was in the 15 to 17 range for legendary, and 17 all the way up to 21 for bad. For the bad and decent lines, there were cases where a natural 20 was just a regular success, not a critical success. That is abysmal. This means that not investing in your attribute is not designed to keep pace with the DCs you see in this game. And I want to draw a bit of a contrast with something from D&D 5th edition. In D&D 5th edition, if you don't have proficiency in a saving throw, eventually your bonus just falls off regardless of whether you have invested in an attribute or not. Pathfinder does avoid that scenario. Like I said, all of the lines were roughly horizontal, so you're never noticing a case where your bonus is actively falling off as you level up. But it's pretty dire. The best progression, legendary proficiency, is unable to even achieve a 50% success rate without attribute investment. There is another way to look at this abysmal progression. Map out these saves, these 5 tracks of saves that I have described, against table 2.6 in GM Core, which is the table for creature saving throws, for monster saving throws. You will immediately notice that of the 5 tracks I described, Great falls a little bit short of low saves, and Legendary falls noticeably behind Moderate, only barely ahead of low. So that is sort of where the game expects your save progression to be from natural math alone without any investment on your end. If your attributes stay at 0, the game is locking your progression to being somewhere between terrible, like well short of low saves, all the way up to slightly below average if you have legendary proficiency. Now there are a few additional factors to consider. For one, I used high DCs the whole way through, but like I said, the GM core does explicitly tell us that at levels 15 plus, extreme DCs become more common, and they don't become like 100% common. Like you will still face some high DCs at those higher levels, but extreme DCs become a real thing you'll be facing. Another important way in which extreme modifiers and DCs go up against player saving throws is the athletics skill, because monsters that use grab or improved grab or swallow whole are making athletics rolls, and skills usually get to the extreme modifier range a little earlier than DCs do, actually. They might be doing it as early as like level 9 or 10, so your fortitude and reflex DC might see extreme athletics going up against it, and this makes every single curve on those previous slides 3 to 6 points worse in the high level range. That's a huge drop. This would mean, in fact, that as you get higher up in the level ranges, your saves are no longer horizontal. They're actually falling relative to what's happening to monster DCs and monster skill modifiers. And this is not a theoretical thing. Like, these DCs and modifiers are just actually there on monsters. Have you ever tried to use the escape action against a high level boss monster, like even a level +3 boss? I have been in circumstances where a barbarian's maxed out athletics modifier would still only beat the boss's escape DC on a natural 20. So DCs do naturally get pretty high in the high level range, and while you shouldn't always be expecting to face extreme DCs, it's gonna happen sometimes, and when it does, those curves in the previous two slides will look a lot worse. And another important way that these curves can get worse is when the enemy rolls against your saving throw DC, like say using grab against your reflex or swallow hold against your athletics, because that gives them roller's advantage, which translates to a +2's worth of outcomes shifted. So when you take all of these, the fact that legendary proficiency only barely keeps up with middle of the road save progression, that you're behind a moderate save for a monster, which also lines up with you succeeding just short of 50% of the time despite having legendary proficiency, and then you add in these additional factors that make DCs even worse than the spreadsheet might represent, between all of those points, there's only one reasonable conclusion you can reach. The game is demanding saving throw investment from you in terms of attribute modifiers. You simply have to put a little bit of investment into attributes. It is incorrect not to do so. If you have nothing invested in your attributes, a legendary saving throw, the best it gets for a player character, is going to feel slightly below average, no matter how you look at it. If you compare it to table 2.6, it's going to feel a little bit below what they call moderate. If you compare it to the DCs of a scaling enemy, you're going to succeed a little under 50% of the time. And then legendary is as good as it gets. When you get worse along the player tracks, you get progressively worse, all the way down to having really terrible performance. It doesn't matter that it's horizontal, it's still gonna be terrible performance. The game has decided that someone with no attribute investment is automatically locked to the bottom half of performance when it comes to saving throws. So if we do have to invest in saving throws, how do we do it? What is our recipe? The first key observation we can make is that none of the saves were succeeding 50% of the time. Even Legendary was succeeding on an 11 at its best. From there, one can reasonably deduce that anything that's not your absolute worst save, like say a Wizard's Fortitude, you probably want to invest enough into your attributes that you're at least succeeding 50% of the time, right? And this is especially important for Master and Legendary saves because of save upgrades. If you have a Master save and you're succeeding 40% of the time, you are critically succeeding 40% of the time, not just regular succeeding. If you can move that up to a 50%, you'd achieve two things. One, you're now critically succeeding half the time on the roll you make, and two, you're only critically failing on a natural 1. Which for legendary saves is also just not a concern because you get the other tier of save upgrades. So this seems like a good baseline. If you get roughly a +2 worth of investment into your attributes over the course of levels 1 to 20, you will pull just enough ahead that you're at that 50-50 mark. In my opinion, this makes for a pretty good minimal amount of investment. This means that if your saving throw was not a bad track to begin with, you will now at least succeed a average amount of time and maybe a slightly above average amount of time depending on what track you were on. That's good. Now, what does middle of the road investment look like? My gut instinct says that here you want to invest enough to prevent some of the drop off we see against bosses. So because enemies that are 3 to 4 levels above you become a bit more common at level 5, and then noticeably more common at level 10, and then they start using extreme DCs at level 15, it makes sense for middle of the road investment to look like 3 to 4 points into that attribute. Between these two, let us build a new analysis. This will use 6 different tracks rather than 5. The first is the absolute minimum track. This is a bad saving throw as described on the previous setup slide, but with an attribute of +1 at level 1 and +2 at level 5. You don't take the attribute any further than that. I call this the absolute minimum because your performance is pretty trash when you do this. You really do not want to invest any less than this in any of your saving throws. It is just a bad idea in my opinion. Then there is the poor track. This is again a bad save track from the previous setup slide, but this time we're doing +1 at level 1, +2 at level 5, +3 at level 10, and +4 at level 15. And here you can afford to delay any one of those pluses, like you might get +2 at level 5, but then wait for the +3 until level 15, and then +4 at level 20, and that's fine too. But this is just sort of the poor track I wanted to analyze. Then there's the middling track. This is a good save, as defined on that previous slide, but you're really not bothering with attribute investments. So 1 at level 1 and 2 at level 5. Then there's the good track. This again follows a good save proficiency, but you're actually increasing your attributes properly. 1, 2, 3, 4 at various levels. Then there's the great track. This is the first of our tracks to follow the legendary save, and this one again has +1, 2, 3, 4 at those relevant ranges. If you don't invest in that, but you do invest in like the +1 at level 1, +2 by level 5 sort of track, you'll be a little worse than great, though you should still eventually overtake the good track, in my opinion. So you might be mostly tied with good now that I think about it. And finally, there's the absolute maximum. This is sort of a theoretical upper limit for how good saving throws can get. This, for example, might be a dexterity-based rogue's reflex saving throw because you got all the way up to legendary proficiency, but you also had a key attribute investment in dexterity. So it started at +4 and went all the way up to +7. So with these 6 tracks, what does that end up looking like? And this is what that math ends up looking like. First up, the standard DCs, and this is a lot more encouraging than the math we saw earlier. The red, yellow, and green lines are mostly intersecting with one another and representing the 3 worst tracks we described on the previous slide. I will note here, much to my surprise, the yellow line actually seems to be overtaking the green line at a certain point, but the difference is minor. I am okay to just call it a wash. The point here being that if your saving throw is really bad as it gets, like a wizard's fortitude, you can invest a minimal amount of your attributes into it, and at least it won't be catastrophically bad. You will no longer be falling significantly short of the low end of a building creature's low saving throw. You'll just be around that low end now, which is fine. It is your poor save. You're not expecting a wizard's fortitude to be really good. The blue line is the one I have labeled the good save. This is one that is now succeeding mostly on 10s and 11s, and it is climbing up towards 9s at the highest end of the level range. That climb is good. This means you're somewhat inoculated against extreme DCs. And I will note here that if just from the numbers, it's not clear to you why this is a good save because you're only succeeding on a 10, which means 40% of the time you still fail and 5% you still crit fail. I will note here that when you get to master save, which this line does, the good line does get to master proficiency, you critically succeed on a 10, not succeed. So because of that, I do feel pretty comfortable saying that the blue line is a good saving throw progression for a player, because even if in a raw numerical sense it may not look like it's succeeding 50 or more % of the time, it's actually doing very well overall in terms of the kinds of saving throws you make. Then there's the purple line, the great line. This is the legendary proficiency with a decent amount of attribute investment, 1, 2, 3, 4 at various level ranges. And as you can see, you start off tied with the blue line, but then you just steadily climb. By the time you're in the level 15 to 20 range, you're beating standard enemies' DCs on a 7. This is a good climb. This means that even against extreme DCs, you're actually going to have pretty average performance, and against high DCs, you have well above average performance. This is what you would expect a good saving throw to look like. And then the white line all the way at the bottom is what you get when you have a legendary save on a key attribute. This obviously blows every other line out of the water, all the way up to level 20 succeeding on a natural 4 against standard DCs. So as you can see, in the very first pair of graphs I showed you, not having any attribute investment automatically locked you to the below average half of the playing field. Legendary would be slightly below average, everyone else would be substantially below average. Now you're getting a much wider range of things that go a little below average, at average, and significantly above average, which is about what you'd expect for players. Let's now look at the boss DCs as well. Against boss DCs, the overall trends still mostly hold. Again, there's that big jump at level 5 where I started using a level +4 enemy, not a level +2. But then, as you'll see, the white and the purple lines do steadily recover over time. So once you get to the level 15 to 20 range, your performance against a +4 boss's DC is the same as your performance against a +2 boss's DC used to be in the lower level range. And the same is true for the blue line, by the way. Not to the same degree, but you will notice that in the level 17 to 20 range, your performance against +4 bosses has also gotten much better. You will also note that the 3 bad lines, the absolute minimum, the poor, and the middling, are no longer having catastrophic scenarios like needing a natural 21 to succeed on a saving throw. It's still bad, like you still need a natural 19 for several level ranges, but it's not as bad as being unable to crit succeed on the save at all. It is a substantial jump over that. Still bad. You don't want to see your low saving throws targeted by a +4 boss if you can avoid it. But at least it's not the catastrophe that is succeeding on a natural 21. With all of that analysis done, let's finally look at the real recipe for saving throw optimization. This is what I recommend characters do. If your save has naturally poor progression, you really do not want to be under +2 by level 10-ish as a bare minimum. You really do want more than that if possible. Anything less than that, you're entering disaster case scenario. Because remember, the +2 by level 5, level 10 metric was the one that said you are still only succeeding on like a 13 against on-level foes. You're still critically failing on a 3, 2, or 1. Getting worse than that is a disaster. Staying there is bad, so you really don't want to go below that. Then, if your save has naturally good progression, you will get the most bang for your buck getting to +3. More than +3 will still feel nice. You're still objectively upgrading your saving throw, but that +3 is sort of a sweet spot because 1, it slightly inoculates you against extreme DCs, and 2, it gets you into that range where you're consistently getting the maximal possible value of your save upgrade class feature, which is very nice. And finally, if you get to legendary in a save, in theory, you could get away with anything. You can actually have no investment in the attribute and still have about average performance because you're still succeeding on an 11. That being said, you do capitalize on increases better than everyone else, right? Every single increase you make makes you that much better at critically succeeding. It makes you that much better at benefiting from both of your save upgrade class features. It makes you that much better at standing up to bosses. So really, counterintuitively, the legendary character still wants to invest a little bit in saves, even though they could get away with none at all. Here is my ultimate recommendation. You want a spread of at least +2, +3, +3 as you level up. Right at level 1, there's a lot of flexibility to what you do. You can really start with like +1, +0, +0 if you would like, if you're clever about it. It's just a little risky. Some characters will naturally start at something more like a +3, +1, +0, or +3, +0, +0 because they need to have that dexterity up or something like that. And of course, this recommendation excludes anyone who just has a key attribute in a saving throw because they're just on a different track. Ignore that. Assuming you don't have a key attribute pertaining to one of the saving throws, this is sort of the minimum spread you want to aim towards. Now, is it worth getting all the way up to +4s if you can? Yes, it's never a bad idea to invest in saving throws. It just has an opportunity cost. +2, +3, +3 is the spread where you're not actually going to feel the opportunity cost. When you're following this spread, you're sort of doing all of the investments the game is demanding of you or expecting of you. And if you're sticking to this exact spread, my recommendation would be that the +2 go to your best saving throw and the +3 go towards patching up your worst 2 saving throws. And then if you're exceeding this recommendation, which many characters will, you consider moving stuff around, maybe capitalizing harder on your best saving throw, for example. And don't forget, there are options in the game that can contribute to better saves. Canny Acumen in low-level play can upgrade a trained save into Expert. You probably then want to retrain out of it once all your saves are at least Expert, which happens to every character by the mid-level range. And then at level 17, you can train back into it for upgrading a expert save up to master. So Canny Acumen can be like a +2 flat bonus on any one of your worst saves, and this is really nice on spellcasters in particular. Bulwark, of course, helps against reflex saving throws, but only a certain subsection of it, though there is a feat that makes it apply to every single reflex saving throw you make. And then the Rogue and Barbarian archetypes respectively can upgrade your Reflex or your Fortitude from Expert up to Master. If there is an archetype that does it for Will, it has slipped my mind for now, but these are just the first two that came to my mind. If you know the Will one, just let me know in the comments below. So that is where my recommendations lie. You want to try to stick to that spread of +2, +3, +3, and if you're able to afford it, if it's not like a hefty opportunity cost, go beyond that and get up to +4 wherever you can. Is it worth bringing a save stat up to +5? This is where we're talking about group 1 on that very first slide, the people who want to invest every single point of attributes into saving throws. In my opinion, unless you have another reason to care for that stat, no, I think it's too much investment. I genuinely think that, let's say intelligence is your dump stat, 2 points of intelligence for 2 additional skill trainings is going to matter more often than increasing your saving throw stat from +4 up till +5 if that's the only reason you're doing that investment. So what I mean is, let's say you are an unarmored character, or you are your party's thievery user, or you like using stealth for initiative purposes. If any of these are true, then dexterity has multiple reasons to be increased, so you might as well consider bringing it to a +5 because it's also making your reflex save better. But let's say constitution, where all it does is makes your save better and gives you some more HP. I don't think 2 boosts spread over 10 levels into Constitution is worth it, even compared to like a couple of extra points of intelligence or charisma. So there you have it. To optimize saving throws, really don't go below the bare minimum of +2 on your worst save. You can go below on better saves, but you shouldn't, in my opinion. You want at least that spread of +2, +3, +3 if possible. Go a little above that if you can afford it. Don't bother going to +5 unless you have other good reasons to be doing so. A pretty simple heuristic after all of that mathematical analysis. And here I also want to talk about how much does my advice vary by saving throw. The most common advice I have seen in this regard is this. Will and Fortitude are the dangerous saving throws, especially in high-level play. Will is often associated with effects that will make you run away from the battlefield, confused, or in the worst cases, controlled. And Fortitude is associated with long-term debilitating diseases, or just outright losing the ability to function in a lot of cases. But Reflex is okay to leave low. It's just damaging options like Fireball and Breath Weapon, and this is really common advice. This is advice I've seen like span other games. It's not even just pertaining to Pathfinder 2nd edition. And you will especially see this advice given to characters who can wear heavy armor and access Bulwark. The whole idea will be that since Bulwark protects you against most of what Reflex does, you don't really need to invest in dexterity, and this is something I addressed in my heavy armor video a few weeks ago. But let's analyze this advice. Does it work? Sort of. But just beware that Reflex can still be the target of some very, very scary things. Notably, knockdown, especially improved knockdown, just means you might lose an action. And of course, Swallow Whole is a big consideration. It involves making an athletics check against your reflex. And one thing I forgot to mention is that if you're building a tanky character, then Tumble Through is also a consideration, because if you're building a tank but your dex is low, you're not really that good at protecting your allies, even in a choke point, which should normally be your ideal circumstance. So keep that in mind when you're building your characters. And here I will note that there is a little bit of variation in whether your GMs will allow Bulwark to work or not. I have seen a decent number of GMs who allow Bulwark to apply against Trip because it deals damage on a critical success. I don't think that's the intended rules usage, but if that's how your GM runs things, Bulwark gets a little bit better, and Dexterity gets a little bit more okay to not increase. Likewise, if your GM rules that Swallow Whole is also impacted by Bulwark, which I think is a really rare ruling, Bulwark gets even better and Dexterity gets even easier to drop. And then there's one more consideration for Reflex. They keep making new spells that target Reflex with some scary effects. If you filter with like the old core rulebook that came out in 2019, yeah, Reflex was mostly just damaging spells. But we're no longer just using those spells. We have more than 1,000 spells in the game now, and some of them target Reflex and have some crazy effects. Dimensional Drop, Containment, all of these kinds of spells are now real considerations, and Bulwark is not going to help you against them. You may want to invest a little bit in Dexterity to avoid being put in a containment and locked out of combat for a turn or more. That being said, how much you see these spells is still very heavily GM dependent, because new spells typically do not make it onto the stat blocks of pre-existing monsters or into adventure paths, because there's a bit of like a lag time in the development of those options compared to player-facing options. So if you only play adventure paths, you might go your entire Pathfinder 2nd Edition lifetime without ever seeing the spell Dimensional Drop or Containment cast by an enemy spellcaster. So keep both of these considerations in mind. There are scary things that target Reflex. There's just a huge degree of table variance to whether you see that targeting or not. And on top of that, it's not just the variation in Reflex. There's other considerations too. Will is arguably better to leave behind than Reflex because you can patch it up with the Hidden Mind spell, which of course is uncommon, therefore subject to GM discretion. And then Fortitude might be more deadly than Reflex to fail against, but it's also the one that typically gives your allies more agency to help out against than any of the other effects. When you critically fail against a fireball, you need healing specifically. When you fail or critically fail a will saving throw, you need very specific kinds of counteract to apply to you. But it's, generally speaking, much easier for your allies to do something about the fact that you got grabbed. And this is obviously not a universally true statement. There are things that are hard to counteract on Fortitude. There are things that are easy to counteract on Will or Reflex. I am just putting a broad point out that I have noticed that when someone fails a saving throw, Fortitude is the one that's likelier to give an out for the other players to help that player with, whereas Will and Reflex are a little less likely to do so. All of that to say, the conversation does have nuance. Be careful when listening to this common wisdom that Reflex is okay to leave behind. Reflex may be substantially more frequently targeted by dangerous effects at your table, depending on how your GM runs things. Will may be just okay to leave behind because of Hidden Mind, etc. Just think of all of these factors when deciding which of your saves you're okay leaving a little behind and which ones you want to prioritize. And now, this leads us to a pretty important conversation. The conversation about freedom in building your characters. A lot of optimizers, especially the most risk-averse group I talked about in the first slide, the one that does every attribute investment into saves, perceive this to be a big issue. They perceive saving throws as really narrowing the amount of real customization Pathfinder characters get. So let's very quickly analyze what that looks like. At level 1, we have 9 attribute boosts. At levels 5, 10, 15, and 20, we get 4 more each. That is 25 total boosts. Assuming that 8 of those were thrown into your key attribute, so 4 right away at level 1, and then 1 at every single level beyond that, and then ignoring the Apex item, which we're assuming is also going into your key attribute later, so it cannot be used to diversify. With 8 gone, we only really have 17 boosts to customize our character with. Now, if you go back to that previous slide, if you take the +2, +3, +3 spread, I am suggesting that a minimum of 8 of your attributes now need to go into making your saving throws better. And this can be as high as 12 of them, because I recommended going up to +4 if you can afford it. But I said don't bother going up to +5 unless you really want to for non-saving throw reasons. So I am saying 8 to 12 need to go into saves. And note here that armor class conversations can muddle this to some extent because of things like unarmored characters or strength dependency for certain armors. So again, I think that would put you on the higher end of the 8 to 12 range, though I don't think it will put you past that. So between all of these boosts, the ones that are mandatory for your key attribute and the ones that are near mandatory for your saving throws, you have 5 to 9 attributes left for diversification. This is not a lot of room, but things really aren't as dire as the everything must go into your saving throw crowd suggests. The only reason they perceive character customization to be so limited in terms of attributes is because they're probably chasing those +4s and +5s much more than they really need to. It is often worth leaving 1 or 2 save attributes maxed out at that +3 mark to free up a little bit of room for intelligence for some extra skills, charisma for a little bit of extra utility, or strength for a little bit of extra terrain traversal or damage, let's say, if you're using a weapon of any kind. These tertiary stats are going to give you more of a marginal value than just a 10% boost to saving throw performance. And I want to narrow in on 2 specific claims I have seen about saving throw investment neutering the potential for character customization. The folks who claim that you should never build these 2 things. 1, a character that has both intelligence and charisma, or 2, a strength-based caster weapon user. So like say a war mage wizard or something that's actually trying to use a strength-based weapon rather than a dex-based one. In my opinion, this is just plain wrong. You can do these things, you will feel a little stretched thin, but that's not inherently a bad thing. Here is a very concrete example. You can be a wizard at level 1 that started with +4 intelligence, +3 dexterity, +1 charisma, and +1 constitution. This is a decent spread for level 1 because you do have above average will already, patching you up for not having a wisdom investment. And by level 20, you will have gotten this to +7 intelligence, +5 dexterity, because let's assume you're still unarmored, +4 charisma, +4 constitution, patching up your worst saving throw, and +3 will. On top of this, you will have been able to use Canny Acumen at some point to patch up one of your 2 expert saves, so either reflex or fortitude. I would personally do fortitude because my dexterity is ahead here. And you could potentially use a Hidden Mind wand to patch up your wisdom weakness, though that is optional. You don't need to do that. You do have good will by any standards, really. And if I were to run a similar analysis where instead of talking about charisma, I was talking about strength for the sake of using weapons as a Gishi wizard, it would be a little harder. I would be stretched even more thin than this, but again, I can make do. So really, you should not let the saving throw investment make you feel like oppressed in terms of how much diversification you get. There is plenty of room. Just remember that of those 25 boosts, you could theoretically use 24 of them to just get all attributes up to +4, right? You shouldn't. That's a really bad idea, mind you, but you can, and that should show you how generous Pathfinder really is with attribute boosts. Some players have these tendencies of assuming that attribute boosts are stingy, because in a lot of other D20 games they are, but Pathfinder is very, very generous with them. You have enough room to build up your saving throws past the point of what the game expects of you, and to diversify into these unorthodox, so-called suboptimal combinations like intelligence plus charisma or strength-based melee casters. And these things will get you legitimate upsides that are worth the slight opportunity cost of having a bit of a worse save. That being said, I still don't like saving throw design in Pathfinder. I think Pathfinder sort of dropped the ball on designing saving throws. You shouldn't leave a save at +0. The game expects you to have brought it up to a +2 as you leveled up. And if the game expects something of you, it should not be giving you that choice of leaving it below that expectation. I don't think that's a reasonable thing to do. Remember, getting it up to a +2 still leaves you with a low saving throw. Getting it up to a +2 is not letting you overtake the game's math, it's letting you barely undershoot the game's math with your lowest save. That means that the game really should have just locked our progression there. Personally, I would have really preferred if wisdom, dexterity, and constitution were sort of auto upgraded for you as you leveled up with no choice to opt out of it. There is a degree of false choice. You do need to spend somewhere between 8 to 12 of your attributes to feel good about your saves. And even if your goal is not to feel good, even if your goal is the bare minimum, you will still end up spending 6 attributes on it. And mandatory investments is not a good thing. The game unfortunately does this thing where there is a hidden expectation of you from the math, which it never signposts to you. In fact, the game signposts the opposite to you because it offers you the choice of dumping wisdom all the way down to -1 or constitution down to -1. It's signposting to you that these are reasonable choices, even though they're not. Even though using them will be really bad on 99% of characters that are not played by incredibly seasoned players with parties willing to work around their glaring weaknesses. And that, in my opinion, is a design mistake. Again, not so dire that you should feel like you have no room for customization. You definitely do have room for customization, just a lot less than advertised, and that is not a good thing. And hidden math that punishes you for decisions you didn't know were mandatory is not a good thing. And that will be all for today's video, folks. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you found it helpful. I hope that these little heuristics of how to optimize your saves ease up the math of it for some of you, because I know saves are a hot button topic, and they're a topic that's hard to get advice on, because anytime you go to a Discord and ask, what do I do with my saves, you will get like a handful of people jumping at you, telling you anything short of maximal investment sucks. And that's not true. There is such a thing as a moderate investment that still exceeds the threshold of what the game expects of you, and maximal investment does have an opportunity cost. Use the +2, +3, +3 heuristic that I talked about wisely. Use it to shape up your character's growth to make sure you're never useless in high-level combat, but don't feel shoehorned into increasing your saves all the way if you don't want to. Only do so if you're able to fit it onto your character without compromising the other things you want your character to do with their intelligence, charisma, or strength. If you enjoyed this video, please like and comment. Every little bit of engagement helps. If you'd like to see my future content, please subscribe and click the channel notifications button. And if you'd like to directly support me, consider joining a channel membership. It is a small fee that goes directly to me and comes with a few perks like early access to some of my videos. Regardless, I hope I'll see you next time. Mathfinder out.